Hey, what's up guys? This is Clint Losh, and the video that I'm about to do right now is actually going to be a follow-up video to part 4 of the Crush the Regs series, where I talk about raising or shoving when you have 10 big blinds in the small blind versus big blind scenario. Remember in that video we showed some strategies there that were counterintuitive to how most people think you need to play when you have 10 big blinds or 9 big blinds. If you remember, everybody says you need to only be shoving or folding. Well, we correctly showed that that's not the only way that you can play. You can play a more optimal game by race folding, race calling versus the right opponents, meaning versus the regs who aren't going to flat you, who are going to 3-bet you with a 20 to 25% range, similar to their all-in calling range. So in that video, I showed a few examples, typically pre-ante scenarios. And I went through a couple examples to illustrate that. There was a recent forum post asking about why I didn't do it with antes involved. So that gave me a good idea, and I said, what the hell, why not? Let's do it with antes and show you what it looks like with antes. And I'm also going to do an example of a chip EV calculation. So for you 180-man guys, 45-man players, when you're far away from the money, how does this play work when you're in chip EV mode and not in dollar EV? Now, one thing I want to say is I can only go through so many examples in a video, or else the videos would be hours long as I go through every single game type and in every single scenario, whether it's 7-handed, 5-handed, different stack sizes. So what I'm going to do is, again, like I did before, is give some examples, help you understand which plays are more profitable than others, when to do these plays, and essentially why. The important thing here is why we're making this play. And then hopefully you can apply it to your own game. But what I encourage you to do is, in order for this strategy to become even more valuable and more pertinent to your specific game, if you come across a specific situation in your game, a hand where you were contemplating whether raise folding or raise calling was better than shoving all in, below this video you'll see a link to a thread where we can discuss this video. So what I encourage you to do is post hands that are related to this strategy for your particular game, and then I'll go through and do the calculations that way, rather than making up a bunch of scenarios here. I think it's best if you guys that are watching this, you look at your own games. If you come across these spots, post those hands, and that's how we can essentially build a database of hands in different situations, in different games, different stack sizes, in the money, on the bubble, far away from the bubble, where we can start doing a lot of calculations and seeing what the optimal play is in a variety of scenarios. But as I said, for today's video, I'm going to be doing post-ante play with 10 big blinds and chip EV play with 10 big blinds, and show you essentially how short you can go with this play. And of course, we're going to compare the concept of raise folding, raise calling with shoving all in. So in this first scenario, I mean, let's just jump right into it. You guys have watched the other video by now, most likely. If you haven't, please watch that one first. And again, that's part 4. So in this situation, what I wanted to do was I took just a standard 9-man game. I made it 6-handed. Okay, so a 6-handed game, and we get 3 deuce offsuit, 10 big blinds, and we're at the 100-200 with ante 25. So as you can see here, most people view this scenario as pretty much an any 2-card shove. So again, we have a 2,000 stack versus the big blind who has a 2,000 stack, big blind 200 with ante 25. And one other thing I want to point out about the post-ante versus pre-ante, the reason I actually did the initial calculation and example in that first video that I made was because if I could show that this play was profitable pre-ante, then it's going to be more profitable post-ante. Because when antes are involved, whenever essentially you're attempting to steal that pot, it's just going to be a more valuable play because there's more chips in the pot to pick up. So, like I said, if I could show that it works pre-ante, it's going to work post-ante. But I think it's good to show it post-ante and show you how much it affects your dollar EV and how important it is to be stealing pots at this level. And the other thing is, what post-ante will do is, the reason that this will become a more profitable play is because for the concept of raise folding, or just raising in general versus shoving, for raising to be a worse play than shoving, with the antes, the big blind here needs to 3-bet much, much wider compared to pre-ante. Okay, they need us to fold much more frequently because, again, there's that more of a pot to pick up compared to pre-ante. Okay, so that's really the biggest difference here with post-ante, is that it's going to force the big blind in the situation to 3-bet us even wider for our play here to not be as profitable as just shoving. So if you were reviewing your game and you come across a scenario and it shows you, look, you should definitely be shoving 3-deuce offsuit. And I gave the big blind an average range of ace-4 off, ace-deuce suited, some Broadway hands, pocket threes. You might think some players are wider. That's fine. Some players are a little bit tighter. I think this is a pretty good average range. Okay, and this is another example where if you're up against a really aggressive opponent, or maybe somebody that knows you could shove any 2 cards, so they're going to call wider, post that example in the forum, and we could take a look at that specific example. But again, this is one of those things where I could play around with these ranges all day and come up with, well, what if he's 25%, 30%, 40%, or 10%? Naturally, the tighter that he's going to be, the more profitable our play is going to be, because we just simply have more fold equity, and that's what we're after. The wider he's going to be, obviously the less profitable a push is going to be, and even less profitable a raise fold is going to be. However, what we're comparing is, what is better, shoving, or what's, for this example, with 3-deuce offsuit, what's more profitable, shoving this or raise folding? So you can see it's still very profitable, 0.68%. So what I want to show you is, real quick, let's just say you're playing a $15 game. And let's just exclude rake for right now. Let's just say the actual buy-in is $15. So $15 times 9 players is $135 is the prize pool. So whenever you shove all in here, it's 0.0068. So every time you shove all in, you're going to make 91 cents. Okay, that's pretty good. Essentially, this is a spot you can't miss. Okay? Now, the question is, what happens when we incorporate the raise fold strategy? Okay, so I did a complete replica of this scenario. Same stack sizes, 3-deuce offsuit. I'm going to raise to 440. I always like going a little bit bigger in the small blind just to make it a little bit more difficult, or leave less room for somebody to 3-bet. If you want to min raise, fine. I always recommend going a little bit bigger. Now, I gave the right now I have the 3-betting range exactly the same as it was in the shoving scenario. So when he picks up those hands, he's going to 3-bet shove with that same hands you would call an all-in with. That is a very good assumption to make when you're in a 10 big blind versus 10 big blind scenario, because put yourself in the big blind scenario. If the small blind raises, and you both have 10 big blinds, are you going to assume much fold equity when you 3-bet? The answer is no. And quite frankly, people might actually tighten up because they think, well, why would you just raise here? They would assume you would shove most of your hands, so they might think you have like a premium hand. But regardless of that, like I said, any tighter it's going to be more plus EV, so that's going to be a good thing. But I don't even want to illustrate that. So I'm going to give them the same range right now and take a look at what's better, raise folding or shoving. So I'm just going to click the EV button here, and you can see, if you follow my cursor, 1.67%, and this is again with antes. So let's just do this quick calculation again. So what did we do? 15 times 9 players, $135 prize pool times 0.0167. So shoving all in resulted in picking up 91 cents essentially every time you make that play. Raise folding in the same situation will result in you picking up $2.25. It's massive, guys. It's massive. So we know that versus the same exact range, raise folding is probably going to be always be better than just shoving all in. And again, this is versus your standard reg guys who are not going to flat. They're going to be, three betting or folding. So now what we want to do is, since we know that, the question is, with antes involved, how wide is he going to have to three bet to make shoving better than just raising? So let's just start giving him broadways, offsuit hands. Let's incorporate some other suited hands. 9/8 suited. People like to three bet with those. Let's even go here. Some offsuit hands. So the range before was about 21, 22%. We went all the way to 34%. Okay, so getting much, much wider. And let's check it out. You can see now, even if he increases his three betting range from 21% to close to 36%, it's still a 1% plus EV play. That is more than what we showed here, which is 0.68. So essentially what we're trying to do is, at what point does this number become 0.68? Let's keep going. Let's just put in some more suited hands, more king suited, some offsuit hands. Let's go to 40% now. There you go, 0.65%, which is pretty close, 0.65, 0.68%. So this player is essentially going to have to three bet you twice as wide as he's going to call an all in. So we had 21% roughly for the all in play, and 42% for the three betting. So he needs to three bet twice as wide for shoving to equal raise folding. So shoving really isn't even that much better at this point. So he's got to three bet even wider. Guys, do not assume that players are going to do this to you. You have 10 big blinds. They're very rarely going to be three betting you that wide. Remember, they have to do it very wide, and they have to do it often. Maybe he does this one time because he thinks he can get away with it. Is he going to do it a second time, a third time? If he's not, then he isn't truly exploiting you, and you can do this all day. Now, one thing I want to point out, and this has been a question that's been posed to me, is what happens when people start picking up on this type of play? You still see how wide they need the three bet and how often to make this play less profitable than shoving. But let's say that that you've shown the players at the table, you've shown a reg that you play against every single day. You've shown them that you are capable of raise folding with 10 big blinds. Don't just keep going in there and doing the same thing versus an opponent who you feel might have an idea of how you're playing. If you've raise folded with 10 big blinds once and twice, use that to your advantage. The next time you raise fold or raise versus him, do it with a premium hand that you're happy to call down with. And then the same goes for, also mix in some shoving as well. Shove all in the next time. Just mix up your play. Have an understanding of how your table image is perceived at that point in time. And definitely take notes. If you notice that a reg is three betting you a ton, that's okay. Just take a note and use that information to your advantage. The whole point of the members portal and all these videos is to get you to think differently than the other players. Exploit them. It's not just about this is the strategy you have to use every single time. Because if people start picking up on this, that's okay. The point is that we're just getting you to think at another level. And that's the most important aspect. So, here, again, we showed that raise folding with antes is going to be much more profitable than shoving all in. And with the effect that antes has on it is that makes it, like I said, more profitable, and it forces the players to actually have to three bet you wider to make it a negative EV play. So you should be more encouraged to make this play when antes are involved. And one other thing I want to do here is let's forget 3-deuce offsuit. Let's take a look now at the concept of any two cards and having a raise folding and raise calling range. So what I want you to do is just bear with me for a second as I just change up. So I'm going to clear this, give us any two cards, and I'm going to use a function here called the maximum exploitable tool, and I'm just going to make up a calling range. I really don't care what it is. I just have to put something in there, and then we're going to fold with the rest of hands. So, and I'm going to go back and give him that standard range that we had before. So I think it was pockets, suited aces, ace 4 off. Yep, 21.57%. So now we're going to raise with any two cards. He's going to 3-bet with that 21-22% range. But naturally, we want to know what to call with and what to fold with. So we're going to hit this button here, maximum exploitive tool. And you can see overall, having a raise call, raise fold range is going to be 1.81% overall. And you can see here, I'll just pause right here, take a look at all of the EV essentially for each hand. And obviously you can see 3 deuce off is going to be 1.67%, which we already showed. But the question is, if he's going to 3-bet with this range, and again, to repeat, this is 6-handed and a 9-man. Everybody's got a relative average stack of like 10, 11 big blinds. So if you're in this scenario, what can you call with? And what this did was it, let's widen this up a little bit. You get a range of ace 7 suited, ace 8 off, pocket 3s, king queen suited. That's going to be your most optimal range to call with. Okay, and that's with 10 big blinds. Now, what happens if he starts getting wider? Just to give one quick example. And like I said, I'm not going to go too crazy with just the what if game, because we can do that for every single range. Let's just widen him about an extra 10%. Just to give you an idea of how wide you can call. Okay, still obviously extremely profitable. No hands are going to be negative EV. Now you can call with any suited ace, ace 7 off, down to king 10 suited, king jack off, queen jack suited. So the king jack off there you see is pretty much like a break-even play. You need to be sure that he's capable of 3-betting pretty wide before you make that call, because obviously this is assuming a defined 3-betting range. So if you're unsure, just definitely be on the more conservative side of your calling range, because for hands like king jack off to be a profitable call, we need to know that he is exactly 3-betting 29% of his range. Well, what if he isn't? What if he's actually tighter by 1 or 2%? Even if he's tighter by an extra couple hands, that king jack off suit becomes a negative EV play. So whenever you're looking at this, and you're looking at your Nash charts, whatever, and you're using ICMizer, and it's giving you these ranges, look at the actual EV of those ranges and understand that if you're off in your assumption of the other player, those plays that might have been slightly plus EV could easily be negative EV. So you might want to exclude them when you're assuming a proper range in that specific scenario that you're analyzing. So I think this is a pretty cool thing to take a look at. And again, post-ante versus pre-ante. The biggest difference is post-ante, you should definitely look to open up more. Players need to 3-bet you much wider to force to cause your open, your raising to be negative EV play, or for your shove to be better, because quite simply we're picking up a bigger pot every time with those antes involved. So again, this is a 9-man game, 6-handed. If you want to analyze an 18-man game or a 180-man game at the final table, whatever it may be, go ahead and find some hands or mark them as you're playing and post them in the thread so that we can take a look at every single scenario. We can take a look at what happens when you have 12 big blinds. What happens when you have 8 big blinds. I will say with antes, because there's pot odds, as I said before in the pre-ante video, I did go through some calculations here. So, but to save time, if you remember in the pre-ante, you could actually raise fold down to about 7 big blinds. Because of the pot odds, I'll typically recommend about 8 big blinds with these really bad hands, like the 3 deuce off. You're going to have to naturally call a little bit wider due to pot odds as soon as you start getting down to 8 big blinds. But again, that could be a situation where you create the scenario, or put the scenario in the forum and we can analyze it there. But I would typically recommend this play down to 9, 8 big blinds at the lowest. But as you can see, 10 big blinds is still going to be extremely more profitable than shoving all in. So hopefully that makes sense in terms of how the antes will affect your play, and it also give it a little refresher, give you a little bit more confidence. I know sometimes people get gun shy with this type of strategy because it's not something that you're normally supposed to do, and I think everybody gets paranoid if you do this after a while, and some people start 3-betting you a little bit. Guys, quite simply, sometimes people can have the best hand and 3-bet you. So don't get paranoid. You can see here how wide somebody has to 3-bet you. Even if they are 3-betting you 40-some%, it's still profitable to raise fold. I think that's the other thing. You know, don't think that just because they're 3-betting you really wide that all of a sudden in a post-ante stage, they've in the long term that's not going to be a plus EV play, because obviously you saw that it is going to be one. But now what I want to do is I'm going to stop right there. I'm going to recreate some new scenarios in chip EV mode. Okay? So we're just looking at far away from the money. You're just looking at spots where you're just picking up chips, not necessarily the value of your stack or the dollar EV. We're going to look at chip EV. This is more for you 180-man guys, 45-man guys that are far away from the money. And I'll pause this video now and come back in about 2 seconds. Alright, so here we are in chip EV mode. What I did was the same exact scenario. Pretty much you can avoid the other stacks at the table because they don't really matter when we're focused on small blind versus big blind chip EV scenario. It's really just us focusing on small blind versus big blind. So again, same exact. We've got 10 big blinds, 10 big blinds at big blind 200, ante 25. And we're simply going to look at, again, the 3-deuce offsuit first. And really what chip EV is going to do is two things. One, the player in the big blind is typically going to be wider. I think we had about a 20-21% range when we did the 9-man example. In the chip EV example here, against another reg, they'll probably call with it at least a 30% range if you were to shove all in. And here's what that looks like. Maybe you could even include some queen tens. You might feel, again, some people are wider, some might be tighter. 30% isn't bad, though. Again, any tighter, and that's going to be better for us with more fold equity. But as you can see, 3-deuce off versus a 30% range, chip EV mode, you're going to pick up about 100 chips, 98 chips. Okay? So what we want to do first is let's compare that to raise folding versus the same exact range. Okay, roughly the same exact range, close to 30%. Okay, here we go again. And you can see it's pretty much double the EV, 200 chips. Okay, and then the quick question is how wide do you need to go for it to be 100 chip to equal the plus EV of the shoving of the all-in shove. So let's include some other hands here. Include some other offsuit, some suited hands. Let's go to 40% again. You know, let's just do that. And you can see, even if he goes to 40%, it's going to be, it's going to start getting pretty even. This might actually be worse than the shove. I increased that pretty big. Yeah, so that's 80 chips. So this player would essentially need to 3-bet you, again, over 40% for a shove to be better than a raised fold. Okay? So I'd say probably right at 40. Let's just mess around here. Yeah, right. So we're just kind of messing around there. But, you know, if 30%, the race fold is significantly better. It's double the profitability of the shove all in. And it needs, the 3-betting range needs to increase by an extra 10% for the shove to be better than the raise fold with 3-deuce off. But let's again take a look at the other key aspect with chip EV. I think based upon the previous example, we kind of knew this. I think it was still important to show you that, again, chip EV, you could see how the calculations look in chip EV mode, and to show you that you're just simply going to be picking up more chips by using this strategy. So let's do this again. Let's clear this. Let's go random hands. Now we want to find out, like I said, the other key aspect of chip EV is, yes, the big blind's going to be looser, but we can also technically call with a wider range. We're looking specifically more at pot odds because we don't have to include any ICM tax in there. So let's go back to that original 30%. Let's see if we can get back there. That's actually pretty close to where we were before, I believe. Yep, right there. Okay. Again, bear with me here. I'm just going to give just a bunch of random hands. Doesn't matter, because we're going to just hit the maximum exploitable play and see what we can raise fold with, what we can raise call with. Again, 10 big blinds with antes. Okay, so you can see here, if you remember, before I show the actual range, if you remember 6-handed at the 9-man table, you could only call with about a 12% range. It was like ace-7 suited, ace-8 off, pocket threes, king-queen suited. That was pretty much your range. Here, if the opponent is going to be 3-betting with approximately this range, again, you might feel that he could be tighter. If he's tighter, that's going to be better for your overall profitability, but naturally this calling range that I'm about to show will have to be a little bit tighter as well. So you need to understand your opponents and what they're capable of calling with. So let's take a look at what this range looks like. It might be actually better to see it by just scrolling over it. There we go. Okay, so you can just take a minute here to look through and take a look at the EV of each hand. And you can see, obviously there's some weird hands in there, like 6-5 suited, 7-5 suited, that are 3 chips plus EV, 32 chips. Those hands you probably want to exclude. 10-9 off is 9 chips. Remember what I said before. This is based upon a predefined 3-betting range of your opponent. If they're any tighter, then those small chip EV hands the hands that show a small chip EV edge, those are going to be negative EV. So what I'd probably do here is I'd pretty much exclude 6-5 suited, 7-5 suited, 6-7 suited. I would probably start including like the 9-8 suited hands, where you can be pretty comfortable that you're going to be making a plus EV call. 8-7 suited might be okay. But let me just take them out real quick. Like these are the hands I would probably eliminate. Didn't take them out there, but that's okay. I would eliminate pretty much all the king 4, king 5, king 6 suited hands. But you could see how much wider you need to call to play the most optimal game, and that's because simply of pot odds at this point. Okay? We're not worried about the ICM tax, so we need to look at, maybe we're getting, 1.5 to 1 odds, or we need 40% equity, after you look at your pot odds. You have to figure out, based upon your opponent's 3-betting range, which we have it defined at around 30%, what hands will perform with that type of equity. So, again, take a look at that. And again, mess around with this on your own. You may not even have Card Runner's EV, but that's okay. Because we're in chip EV mode, you can use Poker Stove or the Poker Strategy Equilabs. That will just give you a specific hand range, and you can give your opponents a range, and you can start taking a look at how hands perform against your opponent's range and get some equity calculations. What hands have 40% equity, 45% equity. And that's the type of work you're going to need to put in to play the most optimal game possible. Now, again, what I'll say is, the most important aspect of this play is quite simply that you make it. You need to just simply open up. Okay, you need to raise, or shoving is going to be plus EV against the right opponents who are the regs. You need to at least be raising. So that's the first step. The second step is obviously finding the most optimal raise call, raise fold range. If you're unsure of the exact 3-betting range of your opponent, very rarely are you going to have a 100% idea of what your opponent could be 3-betting with. But you can pretty much give an average range, especially if you have seen hands that your opponents have 3-bet you with. And again, this goes back to your note-taking, analyzing your database, which I've talked about in the first part of the series. Use your database, go find other regs you're playing against, see if they've showed up with hands that you didn't expect them to show up with, and start finding the bottom of your opponent's range. Once you find the bottom, life becomes easy. But even if you just want to give an average range, if you're unsure about how wide he could 3-bet, then that's where you definitely want to take out the bottom range, the bottom of your calling range. Because like I said, if you're a little bit off, then that plus EV play could be a negative EV play. So you want to eliminate those hands to make sure that you want to, again, you want to be a little bit more conservative, err on the side of being a little bit cautious when it involves risking your entire stack and you're unsure about your opponent's range. So you would then want to call with a range that you are comfortable is going to be plus EV. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense. So to recap real quick, I know I'm like kind of rambling here, but to recap, step one is that you understand raise folding or raise calling, the concept of just raising in general, is going to be more optimal than shoving, as long as you're up against a reg and a player is not going to flat you. That's the key. We don't want the player to flat us and force us to play out of position. So against your regs who are only going to 3-bet or fold, and you know that their 3-betting range is not going to be significantly wider than their all-in calling range. And more often than not, 95 out of 100 players, it's definitely not going to be. Okay, you might find some of those players that might, okay, take a note and move on. Most are not. Okay, so the most important part is when you identify those players, raising is going to be better than shoving. Then when it comes to your calling range, find an optimal range. If you're dealing with chip EV, you're looking at your pot odds and figuring out what hands give you that required equity based upon those pot odds. And if you're dealing with a 9-man game, an 18-man game, a final table of a 45-man, and you're dealing with some more ICM, understand how the ICM tax affects your calling range. And again, play around with Sit and Go Wizard for that, or other ICM calculators, Hold'em Resources, ICMizer, and start getting an idea of your ranges. Again, in that 6-handed 9-man game, even with antes, we're pretty much calling with like a 12% range versus a 20% 3-betting range. And what I like to do is give myself a baseline calling range. And that baseline calling range is the range that we saw before. Pocket threes, ace-8 off, ace-7 suited, king-queen suited. That's kind of like my standard raise call range versus most regs. And then from there, what I do is I adjust up or down, or adjust wider and looser, depending on other variables. What are the other stack sizes of the table? Is this opponent tighter than the average, looser than average? So, but important is get that baseline range and adjust up or down from there. So, hopefully, these calculations helped. It gave you some more scenarios to think about. But again, I encourage you to use the forum. Click the link underneath of here for the specific thread for this video, so that you can post hands and see what's going to be better. In your specific scenario, whether you have 9 big blinds or 12 big blinds, or looking at the stack sizes, or whatever the ICM scenario is. I think it's the best thing to do is post your specific hands, and we can go from there. And I'll respond and do the same calculation. I'll do a screenshot of the card runner's EV calculation to give you an idea of what would have been the optimal play. So hopefully this has been helpful, and stay tuned for the next video, guys. See ya.